And hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. It is Friday, and that means Friday Live. This is our 17th episode in what we hope will be an infinite series of entertaining horological entertainment. It's fall, and we've got lots of news.
Yeah, welcome back. We were gone last week.
Yes, we were gone last week due to several of us being on the road. But here we are with, I think, the biggest news of the week, and maybe of the year for HODINKEE at least, is that we launched our first print publication, which I have to say we're pretty darn excited about. It's something very special. It's available to purchase on the website, of course. And there's a lot of just fantastic stuff in it. We've got an interview between John Mayer and Thierry Stern, the CEO of Patek Philippe, which I think is pretty fantastic. Ben Clymer's done an amazing Porsche story, beautiful visuals and lots of in-depth information on that. There's a ton of fantastic watch content as well. We have Cara, you want to tell us a little bit about who we've got talking about their watch collections and their activities?
Yeah, so we have a range of articles, as you would expect, in our new magazine. And one of my favorite ones is there's a collector's segment that people talk about their watches and why they collect, and it's really interesting, and it's different figures. I won't name who, so you can wait and see when you read the magazine. And then there's another one called Dialed In that was really interesting, where kind of each person picks their favorite dial from any watch that they love. And dial design is something that's really important to a watch, and so I think it's really interesting to see them outside of the case.
Yeah, I think that might have been one of my favorite stories in the magazine, actually, because we asked a group of very serious collectors to kind of pick what their favorite dials were. And the funny thing is, they all picked things that are dramatically different from each other, and I think it really speaks to the just sort of diversity of tastes and interests that drive collecting. You know, one of the things we tend to assume when we start out with watches and started as watch collectors, as budding connoisseurs, is we tend to assume that people got into watches, everyone has gotten into watches for the same reasons we did, and of course that's not true. People have, there are as many different reasons for getting into watches as there are collectors.
For sure, and some of my favorite articles in the magazine include an excellent piece by Gary Steingart, who I think we all agree is one of the best writers in America, and then John Mayer's conversation with Thierry Stern.
Yeah.
It was really, Thierry is someone who many of us have interviewed, but to have John, who is a real creative force and someone who's at the top of his game in a creative field, talking to someone who's creating watches was super interesting, I thought.
Yeah, fascinating meeting of minds, to say the least. So there's that and tons more. Something I think we're all very pleased with and very happy to have created, and we hope you guys feel the same way.
Yeah, and you can pre-order it on the HODINKEE shop.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So Jack was out of town last week doing something pretty exciting, and I think you went to Japan.
Yes. So myself and the two gents who are behind the camera, you don't see them, but certainly they're the reason that we are able to be here. We went to Japan to do some work with Seiko, particularly focusing on Grand Seiko spring drive. And we spent some time at the Shinshu Watch Studio, as Seiko calls it, which is in Shinshu Prefecture, Shiojiri, Japan, where the Grand Seiko spring drives are made. Dials, cases, movements, movement decoration and assembly, all happening in the same space. This is also where the famous Seiko Micro Artists Studio is located. And this is where their head watchmaker, Mr. Nakazawa-san, is responsible for the assembly and adjustment of really exotic high-end Seiko spring drive watches like the Crador spring drive. Really just an amazing place to visit. And there is truly a phenomenal amount of information that we were able to gather. We're looking forward to sharing it with you guys in the coming months, but I just thought I'd mention a couple of things that we saw while we were there. The first is, one thing that I've heard people wonder about over the years on the internet is you see these beautiful blued steel hands on some of the spring drives and on spring drive Grand Seikos and on some of the other Grand Seikos as well. And there's always been some question as to whether or not are they heat blued, are they chemically blued, is it paint? Yeah. And I'm happy to say that we actually saw the production of heat blued seconds hands going on at the Shinshu Watch Studio, and it's done by hand, one at a time. In a very traditional fashion. It's a tough thing to do if there's the slightest breeze or if the watch hands aren't polished perfectly, you don't get an even blue tempering. So that's just one of the many kind of hands-on artisanal approaches that we see at the Shinshu Watch Studio.
If you don't time it just right, you can overblue the hand or even distort the metal.
Yeah, and I mean sometimes people do that on purpose. You see hands tempered to in vintage watches. You sometimes see hands tempered to a purple or tempered to a brown. But to get that beautiful kind of classic cornflower blue, that takes a pretty good judgment and excellent timing.
So if they sneeze, they have to start over again.
Yeah. Also, we stayed not in Shiojiri, but in a nearby town. It's about a 10-minute train ride away called Matsumoto. And Matsumoto is interesting because, well, for a number of reasons, but it actually has a castle in it that is one of only 3 remaining medieval sort of daimyos, as they were called, feudal lords' castles left in Japan. A number of them were destroyed over the course of the 20th century for various reasons. Some of them were just in a poor state of repair and were allowed to kind of fall apart. But this one has been beautifully maintained and restored. It's absolutely gorgeous. The central inner building is surrounded by a moat that's full of tame carp that actually will, I can only assume people there feed them, because if you stand by the side of the water, these fish will actually swim up and stick their mouths up out of the water as if they're begging to be fed, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
One of the neatest features of the castle is that there is a pavilion off one corner that has been especially constructed for watching the moon. So in Japan, it's traditional, and it has been for around 1,500 years, to hold moon viewing parties in autumn. It's kind of a celebration of the autumn moon. Stems from a traditional harvest festivals, when everyone was going by a lunar calendar in an agricultural society. Right. And the moon is tremendously, tremendously important in Japanese culture as kind of symbol of their connection to nature. And just the thought that there was a room built, how many castles are there in the West with rooms specifically devoted to holding moon viewing parties? I just thought it was a wonderful and very characteristically Japanese thing.
Right. Probably 0.
Yeah, they might be incredibly common.
Right.
I actually wouldn't know, so probably we're going to get a ton of comments.
You don't have a castle.
You don't have a castle with a moon? What's your problem?
I don't know, but that might be my new goal in life.
Yeah.
Castle with a moon watching room.
Or just any...
Or any castle.
Any castle, really.
Any castle. Yep. Yes.
And the Micro Artist Studio is a really interesting place to visit. It started out as a space under the stairs at the Shinshu Watch Studio, and they still have that space. They broke through one of the walls and connected it to a slightly larger workspace. But Mr. Nakazawa works every day still in his customary seat under the stairs where he's been for many, many years. And there were just a couple of interesting things that we saw there. One is that there's actually a miniature Shinto shrine in the Shinshu Watch Studio, and it is connected to a larger Shinto shrine located elsewhere in Japan that is actually dedicated to an early Japanese emperor who's considered kind of the patron saint, so to speak, of time in Japan. He's thought to have invented the first water clocks and to have made the water clock system of telling time something that was ubiquitous in medieval Japan. And apparently the folks at the Shinshu Watch Studio, whenever they finish a major piece, before it goes to quality control, they do a little ceremony to placate the spirit of this emperor in the Shinto shrine in order to make sure that the watch passes with flying colors, which is something that I'm pretty sure you don't see. And
that's so cool.
That's really cool.
Something else that we saw there, one other thing we saw, one other of the many things we saw there, was a picture of Mr. Philippe Dufour.
Oh, yes.
In the space where movement finishing happens. And of course, Mr. Dufour famously advised the folks at the Micro Artist Studio how to do high-end movement, on the subject of high-end movement finishing. And he also, quite famously, has made public his view that some of the best, if not the best, high-end watch finishing in the world right now is happening not in Europe, but actually in Japan.
Yeah.
Did you have any interesting foods while you were in Japan?
Yeah, that's a subject of a whole nother discussion. But yes, we went out every night. We ate. Our hosts were fantastic, and it was just a very, very rich and varied experience all around. Yeah.
So that was it, just sushi?
And a ton of other stuff.
Well, the picture of the sukiyaki that you put up there was pretty amazing.
Yeah. It was an astonishing experience. And again, just the chance to spend not one day but several days at the Shinshu Watch Studio and really, really see all these processes happening in depth was just unbelievably fascinating.
Awesome.
All right,
Well,
so
thanks for the report.
Yeah. So we always like to talk a little bit about the watches that we're wearing, the watches that we're experiencing. And John, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So I am wearing today Bell & Ross BR126 Heritage. This is a chronograph that I picked up about 4 years ago. And I wear it pretty often, actually. It's a nice casual watch with an ETA movement, a pretty basic off-the-shelf movement. And I think there's something about this watch that it shows you what a watchmaker can do with a basic movement, if they are willing to devote a lot of their time to design and work around that. It's a really, really well-designed watch, I think.
I like their heritage collection a lot. They have some really interesting pieces this year.
Yeah.
Somewhat, they've been somewhat overshadowed by the B01.
Yeah,
square watches.
I think that's what most people think of when they hear the name Bell and Ross. But for me, this Heritage has always been my preferred collection from them.
Yeah.
I mean, with respect to, it's always great for a watch company to have a watch that's kind of an icon, but having an icon can be a liability as well as an advantage.
Sure.
It can overshadow other, equally meritorious watches.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think that's actually a stunning piece.
Yeah, actually, I got a new strap for it not too long ago, and I'm wearing it a lot now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm kind of a faux pas because I'm wearing a watch that I've actually already talked about on Friday Live.
Well, if it's
But
what you're
real
wearing,
talk,
it's what you're
yeah,
wearing.
it's what I'm
legit.
wearing.
It's legit.
I ran out of personal watches to talk about, but I'm wearing my day data again today. So that's what I have on my wrist. I was going to wear a G-Shock that we have in the office because I think this week they sold their 100 millionth
Yes.
G-Shock, which
Way
is
to go,
pretty
Cassia.
impressive if you think about it. So I was going to wear that, but truth be told, it was a little big and it didn't really go with my outfit today. So.
To say that it clashed with what you're wearing would be to insult the word clash.
Yes, we had some laughs about it yesterday.
Yeah.
It's just not for me. It's for everybody else, though. But yeah, I think 100 million watches is pretty good.
Yeah, think of it, 100 million G-Shocks. They first came out in the early 1980s, and they've been selling like hotcakes ever since, and with good reason. With good reason.
So, what about you?
Well, I myself am wearing my Seiko GMT. It's a limited edition that was produced in 2012 in two versions. There was a bracelet version with a 24-hour bezel, and this version without a beautiful, beautiful, rich blue dial. And one of the watches that I enjoy wearing most. I don't think I've actually worn it for Friday Live before, but needless to say, I wore it with great pleasure in Japan, where it repeatedly reinforced to me just how great the time difference was. And being back in New York, it was just a tremendously fun watch to kind of bring home to Shiojiri.
Yeah.
Such a cool watch. I think that's my favorite of your watches, actually.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
I love
Yeah,
that
it's definitely one of my favorites as well.
Cool.
We didn't mute the phone.
Sorry, the phone's ringing.
So the main story here, I guess, or one of the main stories and the focus of our post was the Grand Prix de HODINKEE. Our own Jack Forster is on the jury of the August Grand Prix d'Horlogerie of Geneva.
Yes, that's right. The Grand Prix d'Horlogerie de Genève is it's the closest thing that the industry really has to an industry Oscars. And there are a number of categories that we look. This is actually my first year as a juror, so it's kind of a fascinating process. I don't have the rules as committed to memory as I probably should. But it's been a very, very interesting process. The selection process involves watch companies submitting watches, and many, many companies participate. The jurors then select a final round of watches for us to talk over before the actual presentation of the awards. But the thing that is a little controversial about the GPHG is that we don't select watches from across the board, from across the industry. So this year, as we know, there were hundreds of watches shown at the SIHH, hundreds of watches shown, thousands of watches shown at Baselworld. But we only choose from watches for each category that were submitted by the participating brands, which limits the selection. And famously, of course, some very major brands don't participate. Patek Philippe does not participate. Rolex does not participate. Just as a for instance. So we thought
we'd open it up to all of the watches that were created and presented in 2017. We asked you guys to vote on your favorites. We have the results as of 9 a.m. this morning when I counted them up.
Yes, Mr. Buse was kind enough to actually volunteered himself as tribute to do all the tallying, which was an interesting task because the response, of course, was tremendous. And thank you all for letting us hear from you.
Yeah. So we have our results. So I guess maybe we can just kick it back to Jack, who can tell us what he chose for the Petite Aiguille, which is the watch priced under 8,000 Swiss francs.
And it's impossible to pronounce. We actually had to look it up on YouTube to pronounce it.
Yeah, we had to watch
times.
a YouTube video to figure out how to.
Louis is not
out
here.
of the office, so we couldn't answer.
So he can't guide us through that.
So it's there are actually three categories. There's a Petite Aiguille, there is a mechanical exception, and there is Aiguille d'Or. And aiguille is actually, les aiguilles are actually, that's the French for the hands of a watch. The word literally means needle, actually, and it's derived without a whole lot of alteration from the Latin word for needle. So while it literally means needle, it actually refers to watch hands in Francophone watch speak. So the first category, Petite Aiguille, is what do we think is the best watch under 8,000 Swiss francs?
Yes.
And the one that I picked was actually the Grand Seiko SBGW 253, and for me this was a really, really easy choice to make. A reproduction of one of the original Grand Seiko models in steel at a fantastic price with a modern movement, unbelievable aesthetics, basically the quintessence of everything that has made Grand Seiko such a huge, huge runaway, at first cult favorite and then general watch enthusiast fan favorite. I just think it's a superb piece.
Such a cool watch.
Yeah.
Cara?
I chose the JLC Master Control Date coming in at 5,700. I thought the clean aesthetics, the automatic movement, it just really was a big hit for me and I think a lot of people at SIHH this year. It's a watch I would definitely wear myself if given the opportunity to purchase. And yeah, so that is my choice for the Petite Aiguille. Aiguille.
Aiguille.
Another great choice.
Just let Jack say it because Jack figured it out.
And I went with the Tag Heuer Autavia 2017, the watch that was produced based on the online competition where they pitted all the, or many of the vintage Autavias against each other, and we all got to vote.
Yeah,
and then I chose that one, but then my close runner-up was the one Jack chose, that Grand Seiko, which was, can't go wrong with that.
Yeah,
either.
I felt this was kind of a difficult year, actually. There were a lot of, I think, more strong candidates than usual in the Petite Aiguille category. There was some great stuff from Omega. I mean, it was a year when I think a lot of watch manufacturers kind of tried harder than usual to produce something that was both affordable and a tremendous value added. So definitely our choices are, our personal choices, but there's certainly not a knock against the tastes of folks who picked other things because, there was just picking one thing is always a little bit of an artificial exercise, and there were a lot of great potentials this year.
Right.
And those of you in the audience, you chose also the Grand Seiko.
Oh, there you go.
The same model, steel model?
Exactly, yeah, the same
Wow.
steel one, yeah.
Wow.
That was the winning one.
It's a good choice.
Moving on to Mechanical Exception, which is a watch that has to have some level of complication. The Grand Prix defines it as the best watch featuring automatons, chiming complications, innovative display, or other unusual mechanical features. So for that one, I went with the Patek Philippe 5531R. Or no, I'm sorry, that was Jack. I went with also a Patek Philippe. Sorry, I started reading it. I went with the Aquanaut 20th Anniversary Advanced Research, which had the compliant mechanism for the travel time, which I just thought was super cool.
Actually, yes. Controversial aesthetics for that one, because Patek opened up the dial in order to make the compliant mechanism visible. But I thought it was cool, just in terms of mechanical solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry for the spoiler on Jet.
They'd have found out in a couple
I think we'll
minutes.
survive.
Yeah. we might live.
I am, okay, so mine's like a little, I don't know, hear me out. So I chose the Audemars Piguet. I had a hard time with this one because I think there were a lot of highly mechanical watches that came out this year that I thought were really
it's
amazing.
It's a very elastic category, the way the...
Exactly, so then it's kind of like you have the Aiguille d'Or and then this one, so it's kind of, it was tough to pick. And some people had already chosen ones that I also wanted to choose. But so with this one, I chose the AP Perpetual Calendar in ceramic, not because the movement is necessarily crazy, but because they spent 600 hours developing the case and the ceramic for the actual. And I like the mix of the sporty case with the really high caliber movement. So that's why I chose that one. Yeah.
Great pick.
That's my pick.
And why not?
That's my pick. I'll tell you more when we get to the next category.
So, and I know no one saw this coming.
Surprise, surprise.
Dude, John, we're good, right?
Yeah, we're good.
Oh my God.
Anyway, my choice for mechanical exception was the Patek Philippe 5531R World Time Minute Repeater. It is very unusual to see a genuinely new complication. Just because watchmaking has been around in one form or another for 500 years, and a lot of very, very ingenious people have devoted a tremendous amount of time, energy, and talent to coming up with unusual mechanical solutions, new mechanical solutions. And Carol Forestier, for instance, at Cartier, who's one of my favorite people in the business, she basically flat out refuses to describe anything she does as new, even if it probably is, because she knows that the second you say this is an all-new development, somebody's going to pull something that Grand Prix, made in 1925 out of a drawer in Le Chaux de Fonds, and lo and behold, it's not new anymore. But this is as far as I can tell, the first time this has ever been done. A minute repeater that will chime the correct hour for whatever local time zone you are in. It's not the first time that a minute repeater has been combined with a world time complication, but every other time it's been done, the world time complication, the minute repeater, excuse me, only and always times home time, no matter what other time zone you're in. So the 5531R, that's its party trick. There was considerable mechanical problem solving that had to be done in order to make it work, and I thought the aesthetics were great.
Yeah. My understanding was that this watch obviously arose out of a desire to pair the world timer with a chiming watch.
Yeah.
And initially they thought maybe we'll just have it do the home time, but
Right.
then they decided, what really would be the point of that? Let's take the time. I think it took 5 years to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an absolutely fascinating research project, and I think a big win for Patek Philippe. Also,
Absolutely,
who
yeah.
have been pushing innovation in chiming complications, especially very hard for the last few years with the Grandmaster chime and other pieces.
Killer watch. And the audience went with Vacheron Constantin's Les Cabinetiers Celestia Astronomical Grand Complication, which,
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
an
I can't
insane
argue
watch.
with your decision, which you arose at by consensus. What a good one.
Yeah, and that was I think by far the most voted for.
I think
Yeah.
out of, when we cut off and started counting, we had, I think, a little over 50 votes in, and 13 of them went to that watch.
And I think with good reason. I mean, it's truly an exceptional mechanical timepiece.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, of course, a drum roll for the
Oh yeah, Jagield.
Watch of the Year, or the
Oh.
Aiguille d'Or.
That was sad.
Jack, would you like to kick it off with your choice?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to kind of get the Vacheron Constantin Celestia in there someplace, so I came within a hair's breadth of putting it in mechanical exception. To me, it was a little bit more of a watch of the year choice than a mechanical exception choice per se, but again, it's really splitting hairs and very difficult to drop either of these two watches, the Patek repeater and the Vacheron. I think they both could have gone into either category. The reason that I put it in watch of the year is because I think it just works so well as a kind of holistic approach to very, very high-end watchmaking. The way that it puts together all of these different astronomical cycles, in the way that it encodes all of these different astronomical cycles mechanically and puts them all together in a single watch that works as a unified visual and aesthetic and emotional experience. I just think that kind of thing doesn't come along very often. And generally, when you see highly complicated watches, you can be awestruck by their complexity, but do they work as a sort of unified experience? And often the answer is, well, no, they work better as a sort of, you're checking off complications. What some people call a wedding cake approach to making complications. But this one is I think, really just a beautifully unified aesthetic statement.
Yeah. It's
And
amazing.
it's a watch that wears really well too. I was looking at a wristwatch.
Yeah,
of
oddly
it.
enough, it's surprisingly wearable. I mean,
You said it was really comfortable.
Somebody in the office said that you could just imagine seeing somebody on the subway wearing it, and I said, I don't think the guy who bought that watch
I
rides the subway.
am
be a very
hoping I
elevated
see it on the subway. I think that would be a total boss move.
I would
Celestia on the subway.
I would go against my usual habit of not making eye contact with strangers to ask the person wearing that one how it came to be on their
It would
wrist.
be a really great watch spotting.
Yeah.
Would love that. For me, no shock here, I chose the Lange 1815 annual calendar, not just because I wrote about it yesterday, but because I truly think this watch hits all the marks for me for a watch, and I think this is the watch of the year.
Great story, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I went with Bulgari's Octo Finissimo Automatic, which I had a chance to actually go on a week on the wrist with quite a while ago, and loved. And I think Jack
That's a
brought it
great
up
watch.
for us. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a really cool watch. It
Isn't it?
wears
Yeah.
really well. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny, that watch and the Vacheron couldn't be more different in most respects in terms of specifics, but I think they're both alike in taking the idea or the approach to creating a certain kind of complicated watch. And lest we forget, extra thin watchmaking is often considered a form of complication within the watchmaking industry.
And just a
And making
beautifully,
it really
beautifully
fresh.
designed watch
Yeah.
too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like very thin, but it's a beautiful watch to look at.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to wear. Yeah.
And like the Vacheron, absurdly comfortable. And you don't usually think of a watch of that type as something that you could wear as an everyday watch. I mean, ultra thin watches are usually more fragile than not.
Yeah.
But this
This
one really
one.
feels like, hey, you
And
can
that
wear it.
bracelet.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
That's one of those watches where it's like if you get it, you kind of have to get the bracelet, I think.
Right.
Oh, 100%. That's kind of the best part, I think.
Yeah.
So the seamless looks.
I think there will always be contrarians who, the same kind of person who buys a Royal Oak but insists on having it on a strap, which is fine.
That can all, yeah. Depends on the person. But the audience felt
They felt the same way.
felt the same way.
And that's the one you
I
voted
think
for.
John matched up with the audience the
Did I?
most.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because if you look at
So-
the Petite Aiguille, yeah.
Yep.
John understands you.
Vox populi, vox Dei.
The voice of the people.
Yes.
But yeah, so now I think we're going to take some live questions, which we forgot to tell you to put in the beginning. So if you have them, submit them quickly. So we will answer some of those after, right now, right?
Yeah, let's pull those up there in the Friday Live channel as usual, correct?
I see a cool, fun guy is back.
Oh yeah, cool fun guy. He says, "Who cuts your hair?" Talking to John. I haven't had a haircut. I haven't had a haircut in a while. Actually, I'm going to try to do it tomorrow morning. One of my best friends is getting married in Connecticut, so I'm going to try to get in and do that. But I go to Bedford Barbers in Midtown in New York.
Maybe you should ask
Your
Cara
hair
if
looks
she does.
great.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never had a haircut, so I have no idea what that's like.
Austin asks, when will your limited edition Black Volume 1 be out?
Oh,
The what?
I think it's for the magazine. I think it's sold out.
Oh yes,
Actually.
that is sold out. But the
Yeah.
the soft cut, the
The soft cover version,
this one is still available.
which the lovely Cara
Pre-order
is available
on the
pre-order.
HODINKEE shop now. It's awesome.
Max Levinson asks,
Hey, Max.
Oh hey Max.
what is better to buy, an Omega Speedmaster 321 or a newer one?
Oh boy. I think it probably depends on what you're after. They're both fantastic watches for different reasons. You know, the new version of the new quote-unquote version of the Speedmaster Moonwatch has not changed since Omega had the Speedmaster recertified for manned spaceflight in 1973. And in fact, they are not going to change that watch because if they did, NASA would have to recertify it, and I think they don't want to go through that all over again. The 321 is, it's the Gemini Apollo Moonwatch, and that's a very refined movement in a very kind of utilitarian package. But a beautiful overcoil balance spring, just a very refined watch from a mechanical standpoint. The newer version of that movement is a little bit less high test, so to speak, but probably more reliable mechanically.
Nicholas Iglesias asks us what our favorite watch is under $3,000. Ooh, that's a tough one, isn't it? I'm going to say it's going to be probably any of a number of Tudors that slide in under there.
Under 2,000.
Under 2,000.
I think
I'm
vintage,
sorry,
yeah.
under 3,000.
Under 3,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Does it have? And vintage is a good way to go.
Yeah,
with
vintage
that as
definitely.
well. I think, as I've said many times, the Rolex Datejust is under $3,000. Usually, you can find one for like $2,500 if you look hard enough. So that's a good one. And then
There's a part of me that
pole routers.
Yep. Oh, pole routers.
Those are
The only
really
thing
good.
about pole routers is vintage pole routers is I think mainsprings are getting hard to find
Oh.
if you need
Yeah.
them serviced. For me, I always think if I had to have one watch under $3,000, it might actually be a Grand Seiko Quartz. I love the idea of having something that's kind of the best of its kind. And it's one of the absolute best quartz watches not only Seiko has ever made, but I think anyone has ever made. And it's I have kind of a personal connection with Grand Seiko because I've been a Seiko fan for many years.
Yeah. And you just went to Japan last
And I
week.
just went to Japan, and I had a chance to really see how much care goes into the construction and how much handwork goes into the construction of Grand Seikos. So yeah, I think I might go for that. For all that it might horrify purists. The movement's been designed to last for at least 100 years without servicing.
Here's one that I think would be good for Jack, actually. What 3 books on watches do you think are essential for any watch collector's library? This comes from Frederick Plum.
Oh boy, it's hard to narrow it down to 3. I think for sure George Daniels' Watchmaking. If you really want to understand what there's a lot of conversation around sort of the idea of a handmade watch and hand craftsmanship. And Daniel's Watchmaking, in addition to having kind of unexpected flashes of humor here and there, he's got a very, very dry, sarcastic sense of humor that he actually lets loose sometimes. It's just a fascinating look at how to build a mechanical watch from the ground up, and it's a window into what a watchmaker actually thinks about when he's designing and laying out a watch. Not from an industrial standpoint, but what a single watchmaker who's going to make a watch from start to finish really has to consider. And you know, we have to remember that this was actually a fairly unusual approach for most of the history of watchmaking. Once you get into the late 18th, 19th century, we get into a situation both in England and in Switzerland where really making watches, stuff was jobbed out to specialists. There were specialists in mainspring, specialists in dials, specialists in hands, specialists in main plates, specialists in escapements, and you know, you stuck to the thing that you were good at. So this one guy doing everything thing is a little bit of a modern phenomenon, actually, or a very old one, you know, depending on where you look at the history of watchmaking. So I would say that, and gosh, you know, after that, there's so many choices. You know, there's general histories of automatic wristwatches. There's histories of specific brands. I happen to think that George Daniels, pick Dr. Daniels again, his book on Breguet.
Breguet, I was going to say that.
You guys, what do you think?
I think that. I think also Michael Clarizzo's book on contemporary watchmakers is a quite interesting read if you want to learn more about what's happening today as opposed to what was happening hundreds of years ago.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good ones in our shop actually that you can peruse. Yeah.
Jack Forrester wrote a really good book on Cartier one time, so I think
It wasn't terrible. It wasn't terrible.
that would be my
Hopefully, it's
pick.
not my last watch book.
Hopefully not.
No. We got time for one more?
We have time for one more. Let's
Yeah.
let's see. Harsh Pandya asks, would you spend would you spend more money to buy expensive vintage watches or modern watches like an Urwerk or Renaissance? That's a good question. I would probably go for like expensive vintage watches.
Me too.
Yeah.
Oh God, I don't think I can. I don't think I can split it that way. There's too many possibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, my inclination would be to find something interesting vintage, because I think in general you get more bang for the buck. But that's certainly not true in any absolute sense. I mean, take Urwerk for instance. The only thing that's anywhere close to what Urwerk does are wandering hours clocks.
Right.
And you know, those were made in relatively small numbers starting in the mid 1700s, I think. I actually can't remember at the moment who it was that made the first known example. I think it was a pair of Italian brothers, but their name escapes me. Around 1650, 1670, thereabouts. But you know, there isn't really sort of a feature for feature vintage, highly collectible, especially vintage watch that you can, you know, kind of stack up against it. It's really sort of its own thing.
Right.
So to me, it's an interesting kind of thought experiment, but it starts to break down into what are the unique features of each watch that you're actually attracted to. And then it becomes more sort of watch versus watch than a vintage versus modern question, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Cool.
I think maybe just one. I like this question. Just what would you buy with $15,000 to $25,000? A super high-end time-only watch like the Saxonia 37, or a lower-end high complication like a JLC Master Compressor Perpetual? I would go with the Longa Saxonia 37 because I just think you get super high quality in a really simple case design. But I mean,
Yeah,
I'm a Longa fan, but I also just like
No, it's
the
a
best.
legit choice.
I would rather have the lower end of the best than the high end, if that makes sense.
I feel that way too.
I love JLC though.
I feel like maybe 7 or 8 years ago, my answer would have been the other way.
Yeah,
but
interesting.
now I'm inclined to agree with Cara. Get something very good, and maybe not the very best, but you know that it's coming from an excellent brand.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to luxury, the best rule is always just buy the very best that you possibly can. You know.
Yeah.
If you're looking to kind of name tag a specific complication for your collection, you know, I mean, if you have to have an example of a perpetual calendar in your collection, $30,000 is what you have to spend. Then, you know, I mean, I'm certainly not going to say you're wrong for not, you know, getting a $75,000 perpetual calendar. And I mean, let's not forget $35,000 for a wristwatch is $35,000 bucks. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And there are just an almost infinite number of possibilities. Again, both vintage and modern. But I think I'm kind of with you, Cara. Get the best, and I think John, you expressed the same sentiment. Get the best you can afford.
Yeah. And follow your heart. It's watches.
Yes. Yes.
Do what your heart's desire.
Yeah.
I think that's it for this week. Do we have anything else to add? No.
I think that's.
You don't want to tell anyone how you ate fried bugs in Japan?
Negative, sir.
Okay.
Nice try, though.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week.
Thanks for joining us,
tuning in.
everybody. And as always, thank you so much for your answers. We're going to keep asking you what you think about lots of different things in the coming weeks and months. Great to see such a terrific response. Great to be back. And thanks so much for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.